to number 4. And that is, what the Baal Shem Tov introduced was that now the time has come that we should be studying Chassidus, which is the deeper, more esoteric part of the Torah. And that was one of the big reasons for the controversy, because up until then, people studied Gemara, they studied Chumash and Rashi, they studied Halacha, they studied what we call Nigla, the revealed part of Torah. And only very great tzaddikim studied the esoteric part of Torah. The first one to introduce that now the limitations that used to be are no longer applicable was actually not the Baal Shem Tov, but it was the Arizal, who lived 200 years before the Baal Shem Tov. And he began to spread the teachings of Kabbalah. The Baal Shem Tov took it a step further. Even when he taught the Kabbalah, it was still for scholars, for people who are sort of in a more higher level spiritually. The Baal Shem Tov said, now the time has come that everybody should be studying Chassidus. And the question is, why? So we know that Chassidus is part of Torah. In itself, it's nothing new. What is new is that now it should be accessible and it should be studied by everyone, not limited. Why? And how's it related to the purpose of Chassidus to develop that deeper and emotional bond with Hashem? So I'll explain it with a story. As you know, in the early generation, when Chassidus first was founded, there was a lot of misunderstanding. And as a result of that, there was very, very strong opposition, extremely strong opposition to Chassidus. And people felt that this was a movement that deviated, God forbid, from Judaism. And this is a movement that puts Judaism in danger. And sometimes if a person was exposed as a chassid, he could have been attacked physically because people looked at them that these are people who are out to mislead Jews and lead them away from Torah and from Judaism, God forbid. So this chassid once told a story how he became a chassid. And he said one day there was a guest lecturer that came to their town. It was quite common in those days. There were lecturers, Torah scholars that traveled from town to town. And they were a guest lecturer. They would speak words of Torah in the town where they came. And they were paid for it. And that's how they had their livelihood. So one of these guest lecturers came to our town. And he was speaking in the shul. And he gave a very beautiful, deep, Pilpul, which is a Torah discourse, and everything that he said was amazing. People loved it. And he did not let anyone know that he's a chassid. On the outside, he looked just like everybody else. At the end of his speech, as he's about to finish, he said, and now I have one more question, and with this I'd like to conclude. What was the question? It says in the Torah, we read this in the Shema, V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, you should love God your God, V'chol levavcha, V'chol nafshecha, V'chol miyadecha, with all your heart and soul, with everything you have. And he asked, how can there be a commandment to love? You can command someone to do something, and you can command them not to do. But you can't give an order and say, I order you, I command you to love this person. Love is an emotion, it's a feeling. Either you have it or you don't. So how could there be such a mitzvah? And everybody in the crowd is listening and thinking, wow, that's a really powerful question. And of course, it's surprising. People say this every day and didn't think of the question, how could there be a commandment to love? Instead of answering the question, he said to them, if you want the answer to this question, you should travel to Mizrich. Mizrich was the headquarters of the Chassidic movement, where the leader of the Chassidic movement lived, the Maggid of Mizrich, Rav Dov Ber. And basically, he was telling them, if you want the answer to this question, go to the headquarters of Chassidus. And as he said these words, he turned around, jumped out through a back window, and ran for his life. Because now he revealed to everyone that he's a Chassid. In the shul, there was a big commotion. There was those that were praising him because the words of Torah that he taught were absolutely brilliant. And there are those that were criticizing him and saying that he fooled us, it was a deception, he really belongs to that group. And this person said, but I was bothered by one thing. I was bothered by the question that he gave at the end. How can there be a commandment to love Hashem? And I decided to take him up on his suggestion. I'm going to travel to Mezrich to see if I can find the answer. And he did. He traveled to Mezrich. He was given permission to have a private audience with the Mezritcher Maggid, the Rebbe, the leader, the head of the whole Chassidic movement. Told him the story, and he said, I'd like to know an answer to the question. And the Mezritcher Maggid said to him, he's right. There cannot be a commandment to love. So what's the commandment? And he said to him, one of the most basic principles, one of the key principles in the teachings of Chassidus is Mayach Shalit Alalev, which means the mind stimulates the heart. The mind controls the heart. And in fact, in some places it says the mind is the key to the heart, which means if I want to be excited about something, if I understand its value, if I understand to appreciate what it's all about, naturally my heart will become excited. If I want someone to be afraid of something, if I explain them how dangerous it is and what the ramifications could be, how bad they could be, the person is afraid to go there or to do that thing. Because when they understood how dangerous it is, their heart responds with fear. If you want someone to invest in a business with you and they're not interested, you sit down, you make all the calculations, you show them all the facts, you make it so clear that they realize that if they go into this business endeavor with you, in the first year they can make $100,000. Suddenly they're excited, they're actually running after you. How did you change their heart? Once they understood the value, once they understood to appreciate, naturally the mind stimulates the heart. So he concluded that the commandment is not on the heart, the commandment is on the head. That we should think with our minds, learn and understand the greatness of Hashem, the beauty of godliness, and how Hashem is the source of everything, and how Hashem is infinite. And if we meditate and think about Hashem's greatness, then naturally that will stimulate the heart, and our heart will respond with love for Hashem. That's the answer. So this is in essence what Chassidus is all about. Being that the Baal Shem Tov, his mission was to help us develop that deeper emotional bond with Hashem. How can we do that? You can't just command the heart. It's by learning and understanding the greatness of Hashem. So therefore, he introduced that now the time has come. There's such a need to develop a deeper emotional bond that we need to immerse ourselves and study the deeper esoteric part of Torah, which talks about Hashem, talks about the spiritual realm, talks about the spirituality of the soul, talks about the relationship between Hashem and the world, Hashem and every Jew, and Hashem creates the world. And by learning about the greatness of Hashem and learning everything we can about Hashem, that will stimulate our hearts to love him, to feel awe for him, and to be able to develop that emotional bond that we're pursuing, that we're looking for. Which, if one studies the revealed part of Torah, that's not directly connected. Imagine you're learning the laws of Shabbos, and they tell you this you're allowed to carry, that you're not allowed to carry. In this place, it's halachically permitted. In that place, halachically not permitted. How will that stimulate love for Hashem? I'm learning the laws of kosher. This meat is kosher. If the milk and meat get mixed together, under these circumstances, it's kosher. Under those circumstances, it's not kosher. And as you know, in halacha, we go into all the details. What if this happened? What if that happened? After learning all that, how does that leave you with a feeling of love for Hashem? You're learning laws about practical things. And the same with all the laws of the Torah. But when I'm learning about the greatness of Hashem, that directly speaks to the heart. The heart responds with the proper emotion to Hashem. I hope this is understood. So I'll go from here to the next question. Well, if that's the case, so what happened before the Baal Shem Tov? People didn't study Chassidus. They studied Gemara. They studied the real veiled part of Torah. They studied Halacha. And of course, it would be inconceivable to say that all the generations before the Baal Shem Tov, people didn't have that emotional bond to Hashem. They weren't inspired. They didn't have love and fear and awe for Hashem. They certainly did. So how did they get it? Through learning Torah. When they learned practical halachas, they didn't learn about Hashem. And if this is something that you could develop just from learning Torah in general, then why do we need to study Chassidus? So the answer is yes. In earlier generations, people had that emotional bond with Hashem. They were on fire with love for Hashem, love for His Torah and for His mitzvahs. They were inspired. They had awe of Hashem. They had that deep faith in Hashem. And it all came from studying Torah in general. How? So the answer is Torah is not just wisdom. It's not just something intellectual. But Torah is God's wisdom, which means Hashem's presence is invested in the Torah. To use an analogy, which we use commonly, would be when you take a medicine, and the medicine is in a capsule, you swallow the capsule. What you see is a capsule. What you're touching is a capsule. What you taste is the capsule. But what's the real medicine is not the capsule, it's just a container. Inside the capsule, you have a powder, which is the medicine, and that's what heals me. That's what cures me. The wisdom in Torah, the intellect in Torah, as deep as it is and as amazing as it is only a capsule. The real essence of Torah is that it contains in it Hashem's presence. Hashem is invested in the Torah. When I study Torah, I'm absorbing godliness. And that's what inspired them, and that's what put them on fire with love for Hashem. Let me explain this. Today, in our generation, we find that hundreds of people, thousands of people have told their story that they traveled to Israel and they fell in love with the land. They fell in love with Judaism. In Israel, people talk about how they went to the Kotel. They stood by the Kotel and they became very inspired. What did it? Is it because they knew the history of the Jewish people? And you know, the answer is many people aren't even prepared for the emotional sort of storm that they experience. They're going there just as a tourist. And nevertheless, once they get to Israel, or once they get to the wall, something happens. So it's definitely not because they knew the history and they know what it's all about. The answer is there's a divine presence. Hashem's presence is in Israel in general, and specifically at the wall. And we have a neshama, a soul, and the soul is chelik elika mimal. It's a godly soul. So the soul is extremely sensitive to godliness. When my neshama, anybody's neshama, comes to a place that's holy, which is like the Beis Hamikdash or the wall, that is so powerful that it ignites the soul with feelings of love and bond to Hashem. We have the same thing, many stories of people that came to the Rebbe. Just recently, I saw somebody personally relating the story that they were asked a few times by friends, come to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, let's get $1. And he refused. I think he was someone who grew up in a religious home and then he left the path. But eventually, one time he agreed. He came to the Rebbe. Nothing happened. The Rebbe didn't give him any special instructions. He didn't ask any questions. The Rebbe didn't reveal any hidden secrets, didn't perform any miracles. But he walked away from the Rebbe and he made a resolution that he's going to change his life. And slowly he went back to the path of Torah. What did it? Because when they're standing in front of a tzaddik, a holy person, that the presence of Hashem permeates that person and is within that person and around that person. When I stand near that person and I have a neshama, my soul responds to that. And the soul is ignited with feelings for godliness. We had a student, actually once told a story. She lived, she was in college, and she had a cousin. The cousin would go to the Chabad house, but she refused. She considered herself an intellectual. She was very much into women's lib, and this was not for her. What happened, though, was that she was trying to convince her cousin to stop smoking. And one day the cousin said, I'll make a deal with you. If you come to the Chabad house, I'll stop smoking. Okay, that she had an interest in. So they made a deal. She came to the Chabad house and she stopped smoking. Shortly after she started going to the Chabad house, they organized a trip to New York to come here to visit the Rebbe. And she was on the trip. Remember, this is somebody who wasn't looking for spirituality, and she was just there because of some technical reasons. She ended up being part of the group. And she said she walked by the Rebbe, she got her dollar, and after she passed the Rebbe, as she came outside, she just broke down sobbing. Has no idea why, but that's when her life changed. That's the story she told. She said, it was very interesting. They take pictures of people standing in front of the Rebbe. They should take pictures of what they look like after they left the Rebbe's room. And she was referring to herself. What did it? Because if you're in the presence of godliness, then the godliness in me flares up and there's a fire. So therefore, if this applies to a wall, if this applies to earth, to a piece of land, how much more so to Torah? Years ago, when people studied Torah, even if they were studying laws of Shabbos, laws of kashrus, laws of planting seeds, imagine something very technical, laws of kashrus, laws of marriage, nothing to do directly with understanding God. But because this is the Torah and it has godliness in it, when a person studied Torah, after learning for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, they were on fire with love for Hashem. They're on fire with an emotional bond for Hashem because they have just absorbed within themselves more and more godly light. And that inspired them. That stimulated the feelings in their heart. Even though they didn't study directly something that deals with the greatness of Hashem, but just because it's godliness. So then what changed? What changed was that once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, God's presence became hidden in the entire world. It's not the way it used to be. It used to be much more revealed. And every generation, post-destruction, Hashem's presence becomes progressively more concealed. Like one Rebbe gave the analogy of a person sitting in a wagon, and it's at night, he's in the town, the roads are lit up. First of all, there's a lot of light coming from the homes, and there are street lamps that are lighting up the streets. So there's light. Then he starts moving, and the horse and wagon move out of the town. They're on the road now, going out of the town. It's darker, but there's still some light lingering from the city. Then you travel another few yards, and it gets dimmer, but there's still some light. In fact, the further out they travel, it gets dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and less light. So too, when the Beis HaMikdash was standing, this was the source of spiritual light in the world. Those who are studying Chitas would remember that we just learned about this in Tanya, that the Beis HaMikdash was like the heart and soul of the universe, where Hashem's light dwelled, and from there it shines all over the world. That's what the Beis Hamikdash is. So there was godly light revealed in the world, and every generation it's a little bit less than it was, but it was still somewhat revealed. That's number one. Number two, the godliness in us. We all have a neshama. We all have a godly soul. And the godly presence in me was also more revealed. So then naturally, when there was a merging of the godly light and my godly soul, it was a very smooth process that the soul was ignited with fire of love for Hashem and feeling for Hashem. But as the generations progressed and the godly light in the world became more concealed, the godly light in my soul became more concealed, it became more challenging that just by learning Torah, I become inspired. Because we're not as sensitive spiritually as we used to be. That's the way it is from generation to generation. And finally, in the generation of the Baal Shem Tov, which is about 1,500 years after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, this godly light became so concealed that the Baal Shem Tov said, now things are different. The godly light in Torah is so hidden, and the godly light in my soul is so hidden, that by learning Gemara, even though it's godliness, but it's so hidden that it's not going to have that natural effect to stimulate such emotion in my heart towards Hashem. So we need to do something that's more directly related to stimulate that emotional bond with Hashem. And what is it? That's when you learn and you study about the greatness of Hashem, which are the teachings of Chassidus. So this is the explanation. It's true that Torah itself has that power. And years ago, people didn't need the study of Chassidus because just studying anything in Torah, just observing a mitzvah, was enough to stimulate all that emotion. But now, as the world is darker spiritually and godliness is more concealed, it's not sufficient. And we need to do something which is more directly and concentrated on Hashem. And that is what's found in the esoteric part of Torah, the Chassidus, that deals with that. I often think of a mashal that sort of illustrates this. Today we have a lot of supplements to our diets. We take all sorts of vitamins. And the reason for that is, the way they explain it, is that years ago, bread was bread, an orange was an orange, an apple was an apple, and a grapefruit was a grapefruit. But today, using all these chemicals, it doesn't have that same power that it used to have. I once read an article about spinach that has in it iron. And they said in order to have the amount of iron from spinach, the way it used to be, from one bowl of spinach, today you need 23 bowls of spinach to add up to the same thing. Imagine starting your breakfast like that. 23 bowls of spinach. You're not gonna have a lot of energy. I think right after that, you'll be back in bed. So therefore, we can't eat 10 oranges and 15 grapefruits and 23 bowls of spinach. So we take little pills where all that vitamin is concentrated in that little pill, and that helps us. So in a sense, it's the same thing here, that years ago, we didn't need to be something so concentrated. Every part of Torah, anything I did, I gave tzedakah, I did a mitzvah, I went to shul, I learned anything in the Torah, it automatically created a fire. But today, we need something that's more directly connected, and that is why the Baal Shem Tov introduced to study Chassidus. Okay, ready to go to the next? Any questions? Great. Okay. It makes it a little bit boring, no questions, but I'm happy. Everybody understands and everybody's following. The next thing is on the list, and I told you last time that this is probably the most controversial, is the connection to the Rebbe. I'm not going to elaborate on this now because the rest of the class that we'll be giving will be showing you so many sources where it talks about this in Gemara, in Halacha, even something so basic like Rashi and Chumash. We see in all the sources it talks about how important and how essential it is for a person to be attached to a tzaddik. Because after all, what is a Rebbe? A tzaddik, a righteous person. But I just want to explain why now. And the answer is, the basis of connecting to a Rebbe is not so much that that's going to help us to know what to do practically. To know what to do practically, how to put up a mezuzah, how to kosher meat, how to eat matzah, how to celebrate Shavuos. This, we have a book. It's called Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. And that's our handbook that gives us clear direction, what to do, what not to do. We have a Rav, which is a halachic authority, a rabbi who has amazing knowledge of Torah and Jewish law. And we turn to him when we have a question, and he guides us what yes to do, what not to do. The reason why we're so attached to a Rebbe is mainly for this purpose, to help stimulate that emotional bond with Hashem. A Rebbe is a tzaddik, someone who is extraordinary in terms of his connection to Hashem. He is someone who really has this love, this awe, and this faith in Hashem. And everything he teaches and everything he talks about is about the love for Hashem and the emotional bond with Hashem. So being connected to a Rebbe, observing the Rebbe, watching the Rebbe pray, watching the Rebbe observe mitzvahs, watching the way the Rebbe interacts with other people and everything the Rebbe does, and you hear the Rebbe's teachings, it's all about, that is there to help us with the three things which you mentioned: love, awe, and faith. That the more we observe a tzaddik, a person who is above and beyond the average person, and his life is a spiritual life, and he himself is personally on fire with love for Hashem, watching him and observing his fire puts me on fire. And that was the main reason why. So therefore, in earlier generations, where people had that emotional bond, it wasn't as necessary to focus so much on this connection. But now, where we're sort of dry and we don't have that emotional bond ourselves, it's important to connect to a tzaddik, connect to someone he is on fire, and he has that emotional bond, he has that love and awe and faith, and by observing him and listening to him, we become inspired. One more thing, I'm not sure we'll have enough time to finish it, but we'll start, and that is number 6 on the list. We said number 6 is one of the things that characterizes the Chassidic movement. And if you ask people, tell me, what do you think was the main thing that the Baal Shem Tov introduced? They will tell you, Avas Yisrael. Baal Shem Tov taught to love every Jew and how to hold every Jew precious and reach out to every Jew in any way possible. And we asked the question, but that's not new. That's part of the Torah. It's one of the commandments. And even in Gemara, it says that this commandment is essential, it's central, it's the essence of everything. So what is the difference between the Baal Shem Tov and others? And the answer is, in the days of the Baal Shem Tov, it wasn't like today. There weren't that many Jews who were like not religious, not observant. The majority of Jews were observant. They observed the Torah, their mitzvahs. But there were many Jews, unfortunately, who were ignorant of Torah knowledge. They didn't have the information. They didn't have the knowledge. And it wasn't because of their own fault. The Jews in that generation went through a Holocaust. In the year Tavches, Tavtes, which is 1648 and 1649, there was someone by the name of Rabbi Majeski who made some sort of revolution in the Ukraine, and people were going from one place to the other, causing destruction. And unfortunately, in that time, that's not like during the Holocaust. They didn't have the technology that the Nazis had. But nevertheless, 500,000 Jews, men, women, and children, were slaughtered. That's a story in itself. But as a result of that, so many families fell apart. Children, instead of studying Torah, had to be working. And men and women were just fighting for survival. And a whole generation grew up of people that were ignorant of Torah. They had no Torah knowledge. and they made silly mistakes in what they want. They were God-fearing Jews, but no Torah knowledge. And at that time, there was sort of almost like a separation between the learned Jews and those who were ignorant. That those Jews who were learned looked down at the ignorant Jews, did not respect them, and they did not include them. In fact, it's hard to imagine, but they actually had different shuls. There was a shul which was for scholars, and there's the shuls for the ignorant. And if you wanted to go to a shul, you had to prove that you're not just an ignorant old person, you're one of the scholars. Imagine such a distinction they made between this group and that group. And of course, these ignorant Jews felt very down, rejected by mainstream of the Jewish community. And they were looked down upon, they weren't respected, and they surely weren't loved. And the reason was, even though it says in the Torah, "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha," but their basis was love for a fellow Jew is because he has certain qualities in him. A Jew who learns Torah, who observes mitzvahs, he is someone who deserves to be respected and deserves to be loved. But what about a person that doesn't study Torah, has no knowledge, and therefore even when he does mitzvahs, he does it wrong and makes mistakes, does the wrong thing? So there's no reason, no basis why I should love this person or respect this person. In other words, the basis for love for a fellow Jew was because of the quality that the Jew had, that he lived a refined life. And he lived a life of Torah and mitzvahs. But if there was something lacking, like he had no knowledge, and therefore he couldn't even observe the mitzvahs properly, many stories would circulate how they would actually make fun of these ignorant Jews. And therefore they said, yes, you have to love every Jew, but depends who. If he deserves to be loved and respected. The novelty of the Baal Shem Tov teaching was that love for every Jew is unconditional. Makes no difference who this is, and makes no difference what his spiritual level is. You should love every single Jew just because he's a Jew. And what is the basis for this? And why is this related to the teachings of Chassidus? Because the Baal Shem Tov taught that the love for a fellow Jew is because he has a godly soul. Every Yid, no matter what his life is like, has a godly soul, whether they're aware of it or not, whether they're in touch with it or not. The godly soul is there, part of Hashem. If you love Hashem, then you should love every Jew. And if you don't love a Yid, in a sense, it means you don't love Hashem, because it's all one. Love for Hashem and love for a fellow Jew is one. And therefore, that love is not limited to scholars, to special people. It's a love that should be for every single one. And how this is connected to the teachings of Chassidus, we'll continue that tomorrow. Mirz Hashem, same time, same channel. To be continued. You're very welcome.